By the time the clock edged closer to midnight on Christmas Eve, something quiet was already unfolding in the Philippines. Something no one expected to explode across phones, screens, and timelines around the world just hours later. It didn't begin with fireworks or celebrities. There were no grand announcements, no staged performances. It began with warm lights flickering on narrow streets, with laughter spilling out of small homes, and with people who had very little preparing to give everything they could. Somewhere between the smell of rice cakes and the sound of distant carols, a moment was captured. Raw, unscripted, and deeply human. By sunrise, millions would see it. By nightfall, strangers from different countries would be commenting the same words. This is what Christmas should look like. But on that night, no one was chasing virality. They were simply living Christmas the only way they knew how, together. Christmas Eve in the Philippines has always been different. While much of the world rushes through shopping malls and countdown sales, Filipinos slow down. Streets glow with Parol lanterns shaped like stars, handmade from plastic bottles or bamboo sticks, hanging proudly outside modest homes. Families who hadn't been complete all year finally gathered, sometimes traveling hours by jeepney just to sit on the same floor and share the same food. In one neighborhood, children practiced songs they had sung every year since they could speak, holding improvised tambourines made from bottle caps. Elders sat quietly, watching, smiling, remembering past Christmases that felt just as heavy and just as hopeful. It was in places like these, ordinary, overlooked, and honest, that the moment happened. A moment that would remind the world that Christmas was never about perfection, but presence. It happened after Simbang Gabi, the traditional dawn masses that Filipinos attend for 9 straight days before Christmas. On Christmas Eve, churches overflowed. Some people stood outside, barefoot on cold pavement, listening through open doors. When the final blessing ended, no one rushed home. Instead, voices rose. Someone began singing a familiar carol, softly at first, until others joined. The sound spilled into the street, echoing between buildings, unplanned yet perfectly timed. A passerby lifted a phone, not knowing why, just feeling that this was something worth remembering. The video wasn't polished, shook. Faces weren't posed. But what it captured was real. Tired people singing with full hearts, strangers harmonizing like family, children holding candles taller than their hands. Within hours, that clip would be everywhere. By midnight, families gathered around tables filled with food prepared all day for Noche Buena. Some tables were overflowing. Others were simple, rice, bread, noodles, but shared with the same pride. In one small home, a mother served food while apologizing it wasn't much. Her children smiled anyway. Across the street, neighbors knocked, bringing dishes to share. No invitations were needed. Doors were open. Laughter mixed with music playing from old speakers. Someone pressed record again, capturing a moment when one family began feeding another without hesitation. No speeches, no explanation. Just hands passing plates, children hugging strangers, elders blessing everyone they met. That second clip would spread just as fast as the first, igniting a wave of reactions from people who hadn't felt Christmas like that in years. When the videos reached international timelines, something unexpected happened. Comments poured in, not arguments, not debates, but gratitude. People wrote about spending Christmas alone, about empty tables, about missing families oceans away. And then they wrote about the Philippines, about warmth, about how joy seemed louder than hardship. Some admitted they'd never seen a Christmas Eve like this before. Others said it reminded them of what they had lost. The algorithm pushed the videos higher, not because they were flashy, but because people watched them to the end. They replayed them. They shared them with captions like, "This made me cry," and "Why does this feel so familiar?" In a season crowded with noise, something quiet had cut through. Behind the screens, the people in those videos had no idea what was happening. They were cleaning up, washing dishes, walking home under starless skies. Some children fell asleep clutching small toys they'd waited all year for. Parents counted remaining money, already thinking about the next bill. Life didn't pause just because it was Christmas. But the world was pausing for them. Somewhere across the globe, someone who had lost faith in the holiday watched Filipinos sing with cracked voices and rediscovered a piece of hope. Somewhere else, someone decided to call a relative they hadn't spoken to in years. The ripple was real, even if invisible. As Christmas Day approached, reaction videos appeared. Influencers tried to explain why the clips felt different. Some pointed to culture, others to faith. But most couldn't fully articulate it. What they were seeing wasn't performance. It was community. In the Philippines, Christmas Eve isn't about the countdown. It's about showing up. It's about remembering those who have less and making sure they feel included, even if only for one night. That message traveled without translation. No subtitles were needed to understand a smile shared over food or a song sung by strangers who suddenly felt like family. News pages began picking up the story. Headlines described a viral Christmas Eve moment from the Philippines, but they missed the deeper truth. This wasn't new. This wasn't rare. This was ordinary Christmas for millions of Filipinos who had been doing this long before cameras arrived. What was rare was the world finally watching. The clips weren't staged because they didn't need to be. They reflected something deeply rooted. Resilience wrapped in joy, generosity born from scarcity. Challenged the idea that happiness comes from abundance. Instead, it showed that happiness often comes from sharing what little you have. For Filipinos abroad, the videos hit hardest. Overseas workers paused between shifts to watch, tears forming as they recognized songs they grew up singing and streets that felt like home. Comment sections filled with "I miss this," and "This is why I'm proud to be Filipino." Christmas Eve had bridged distances no flight could. It connected people separated by borders, reminding them that culture lives in action, not geography. The videos weren't just viral, they were personal. By the end of Christmas Day, millions had watched. But for those who lived the moment, Christmas Eve ended quietly, the way it always does. Lanterns dimmed, streets emptied, dishes dried. Life moved on. Yet something had changed. The world had seen a glimpse of Christmas stripped of excess and filled with heart. And long after the videos stopped trending, the feeling lingered. Proof that sometimes the most powerful stories aren't planned. They simply happen when people choose kindness, and someone somewhere presses record. As the clips continued circulating, viewers began asking questions that went beyond curiosity. Who were these people? Where exactly was this happening? Why did it feel so genuine compared to everything else online? Some tried to trace the original uploads back to the first accounts that shared them, only to find nothing remarkable. Ordinary users with small followings, posting without hashtags or strategy. That detail alone made the story stronger. There was no campaign behind it, no attempt to chase attention. The moment had traveled because people needed it to. In a year marked by division, inflation, and exhaustion, this Christmas Eve offered something rare: sincerity. The Philippines hadn't gone viral because it tried to impress the world. It went viral because it reminded the world of itself. In the neighborhoods where the videos were filmed, life resumed its familiar rhythm. Vendors reopened their stalls. Jeepneys filled with commuters. Children played in alleys still decorated with leftover streamers. Few residents even knew their Christmas Eve had become an international talking point. When some eventually found out, their reactions were simple. They laughed. They shrugged. "That's just Christmas," one man said. To them, sharing food with neighbors wasn't extraordinary. It was expected. Singing together wasn't content. It was tradition. The idea that this could move millions felt almost strange. Yet that disconnect revealed the heart of the story. What some cultures call normal can be extraordinary to others. Across the ocean, The videos began appearing in places far removed from tropical nights and open doors. In cold cities where Christmas meant isolation and long winters, people watched Filipinos celebrating under warm lights and felt something stir. Some commented that they hadn't heard real caroling in years. Others admitted they had forgotten how communal Christmas once felt. The contrast was stark. While many had built holidays around schedules and purchases, these clips showed people building holidays around each other. It wasn't nostalgia, it was recognition. A reminder that joy doesn't need to be curated to be meaningful. Faith played a quiet role in the background of the viral moment, not as a spectacle, but as a foundation. Simbang Gabi wasn't about being seen. It was about showing up before dawn, tired yet hopeful. The prayers whispered in packed churches weren't for wealth or fame. They were for health, work, and family. That humility resonated far beyond religion. Even viewers who didn't share the same beliefs felt the sincerity. The carols weren't perfect. The voices cracked. But they carried something polished performances often lack: truth. And truth travels fast. Soon the story shifted from observation to action. Inspired viewers began posting their own Christmas Eve moments, tagging the Philippines, sharing meals with neighbors they barely knew, singing songs they hadn't sung in years. The ripple effect expanded. It wasn't about copying traditions. It was about rediscovering intention. People weren't trying to recreate Filipino Christmas. They were trying to reconnect with their own. And it all traced back to a few unplanned videos that refused to fade away. Media analysts tried to explain the phenomenon using data: watch time, engagement rates, emotional triggers. But numbers couldn't fully capture why people stayed. They stayed because the story felt safe. It didn't demand outrage or sides. It didn't sell fear. It offered belonging. In a digital space saturated with noise, that was revolutionary. Christmas Eve in the Philippines became a reminder that humanity still responds to kindness when it sees it, even through a screen. For Filipino families who had lived through difficult years, the attention felt bittersweet. Many had endured storms, job losses, and separation. Yet here they were, being seen not for suffering but for spirit. The world wasn't pitying them, it was learning from them. That shift mattered. It reframed the narrative. It showed resilience not as survival alone, but as the ability to celebrate anyway. Elders who had witnessed decades of change watched younger generations share the viral clips with pride. They recognized the songs, the rituals, the values passed down quietly through years of example. Christmas Eve had always been a bridge between generations, but now it bridged continents. What had once been a family tradition had become a global lesson. As days passed, the trend slowed, as all trends do. New stories replaced it. New headlines emerged. But something about this one refused to disappear entirely. People returned to the videos, not out of curiosity but comfort. They watched them the way one rereads a favorite story, not for surprise but for reassurance. The comments remained active long after the algorithm moved on. And somewhere in the Philippines, preparations quietly continued. Lanterns stayed up. Leftovers were shared. Children asked when Christmas would come again. No one spoke of virality. They spoke of next year, of who might come home, of who they would welcome. Because for them, Christmas Eve was never about being seen. It was about being together. As the days after Christmas rolled on, messages continued to surface from people who said the videos had changed how they spent the holiday. Some wrote that they canceled plans to be alone and joined neighbors instead. Others said they cooked meals for strangers, inspired by what they saw Filipinos do without hesitation. The story had quietly crossed the line between observation and influence. It wasn't just being watched, it was being lived. And that was the rarest kind of virality, the kind that doesn't burn bright and disappear, but settles into people's behavior, even briefly. For many viewers, the most striking part wasn't the singing or the food. It was the openness. Doors left unlocked. Strangers welcomed without suspicion. In a world trained to guard itself, that vulnerability felt almost radical. People asked if it was safe, if it was wise. But in those neighborhoods, trust wasn't a risk. It was a responsibility. Christmas Eve wasn't about protecting what you had. It was about making sure no one felt left out. That mindset, so ordinary there, felt revolutionary elsewhere. The Philippines has long been known for celebrating the longest Christmas season in the world, beginning as early as September. But the viral moment revealed why it lasts so long. It isn't about decorations staying up. It's about spirits staying alive. Christmas Eve is simply the peak of something that builds slowly over months. Patience, generosity, anticipation. When viewers finally saw that peak, they understood why it felt different. It wasn't rushed. It was earned. Some critics dismissed the videos as romanticized, suggesting that hardship was being glossed over. But those who truly watched closely saw something else. They saw tired faces, worn homes, meals that weren't extravagant. Joy wasn't replacing reality. It was coexisting with it. And that honesty made the story stronger. The Philippines wasn't pretending life was easy. It was showing that joy doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It arrives when people choose it. For Filipino parents, the viral moment carried a quiet hope. That their children would grow up seeing these values reflected back at them, not erased by modern noise. That kindness would remain cool. That community would survive the pull toward isolation. Christmas Eve had become a mirror, reminding them that what they were teaching at home still mattered, enough to move the world. Long after the final share, the videos continued to resurface every December, reappearing in timelines like a familiar song. Each time they reached new audiences, new hearts, new seasons of life. And every time the reaction was the same. This feels real. In a digital age obsessed with spectacle, reality had quietly won. What happened on that Christmas Eve wasn't a miracle in the traditional sense. No rules were broken. No records were set. But something rare occurred. Millions paused. They watched without scrolling. They felt without cynicism. For a brief moment, the internet did what it was always meant to do. Connect people, not divide them. And the Philippines, without trying, led the way. Back in those neighborhoods, the memory of that night remained personal, not public. People remembered who sat beside them, who they fed, who sang off-key. The viral clips were just fragments of something much larger, something no camera could fully capture. The feeling of belonging, the warmth of being seen by the people around you, not the people online. And that may be why the story endured. Because at its core, it wasn't about a country going viral. It was about a feeling going missing and then being found again. Christmas Eve in the Philippines didn't remind the world how to celebrate. It reminded the world why. When next Christmas Eve arrives, somewhere a light will flicker on again. Someone will sing without worrying who's listening. A door will open. A meal will be shared. And somewhere else, someone will remember a video they once watched that made them believe in Christmas again. What happened that night will keep happening, not because it went viral but because it was real. And sometimes that's enough to reach millions. Thanks for watching.